On the banks of a river that bears their name, not far from the gleaming towers of a city named for their most famous leader, stands a testament to endurance. The Duwamish Longhouse and Cultural Center, a magnificent structure of cedar post and beam, overlooks an industrialized waterway that was once the lifeblood of a thriving culture. Inside, Chairwoman Cecile Hansen, who has led her people with unwavering resolve since 1975, gives voice to a profound and painful paradox. "We sacrificed our land to make the city of Seattle a beautiful reality," she states, encapsulating a history of broken promises. "We are still waiting for our justice." This is the central irony of the Dwamish people. The city of Seattle, a global hub of technology and commerce, is named in honor of Chief Seal, a leader of the Duwamish and Suquamish tribes who welcomed the first American settlers. The Duwamish are acknowledged as the host tribe of Seattle, the area's first people. Yet, in the eyes of the United States federal government, they do not officially exist. This lack of federal recognition is not a symbolic slight. It is a denial of the treaty rights promised to their ancestors, barring the tribe's approximately 600 members from federal support for healthcare, housing, education, and the preservation of their culture. How can the first people of a land, whose leader's name is celebrated by millions, be rendered invisible by the government of the city that owes it its existence? The answer lies in a story of treaties broken, land stolen, and a people who have refused to be erased. The very existence of the Longhouse is a powerful act of defiance against this legal fiction. While the U.S. government has repeatedly argued that the Dwamish ceased to exist as a continuous political entity, the tribe, through its own perseverance and fundraising, bought back a piece of its ancestral land to build this center of cultural and political life, the first Duwamish Longhouse in over a century. The Longhouse is not merely a building, it is a direct, physical refutation of an abstract legal argument. It makes their claim to sovereignty visible and undeniable, embodying their ongoing struggle for justice, identity, and survival. Long before the skyline was marked by steel, the land was defined by water. The people who have lived here since time immemorial are the Duwamish, an anglicized version of which is Duwamish. In their native Lushootseed language, the name means the people of the inside. This was not merely a label, but a profound statement of identity inextricably linked to the geography they inhabited, the sheltered, interior waterways of what is now Elliott Bay and the vital river systems of the Duwamish, Black, and Cedar rivers that fed it. Their world was a network of rivers, lakes, and saltwater shores, and their name declared them as the people of that specific, sacred place. The Duwamish connection to this land is not measured in centuries, but in millennia. Archaeological sites, such as the one at West Point, Pakachol, date back at least 4,200 years, while villages at the mouth of the Duwamish River have been continuously inhabited since the 6th century CE. Their presence is woven into the geological memory of the land itself. Tribal oral traditions, like the story of North Wind, South Wind, recount events from the end of the last ice age, describing an ice weir breaking over the Duwamish River more than 11,000 years ago. This deep history counters the colonial narrative of an untamed wilderness waiting to be settled. This was an ancient, storied, and fully occupied homeland. The heart of Duwamish society was the Longhouse, or ul-ul. These impressive structures, built from the sacred and plentiful cedar tree, were far more than simple dwellings. They were the centers of social, ceremonial, and economic life, each one housing multiple related family units in a large open space partitioned by woven mats. Within the Longhouse, extended families cooperated in daily tasks, from obtaining food to building canoes. By 1851, on the eve of permanent American settlement, the Dwamish and their close relatives occupied at least 17 villages with over 90 longhouses scattered across the lands that now comprise the greater Seattle metropolitan area. Life for the people of the inside was governed by the rhythm of the seasons. a cycle of movement and congregation that reflected a deep understanding of the ecosystem. In the spring and summer, families would leave the large winter villages, traveling by canoe to hunt, visit relatives, and gather the bounty of the land: salmonberry shoots, camas bulbs from nearby prairies, and a rich variety of berries that were eaten fresh or dried into cakes for the winter. Salmon was the absolute lifeblood of the people. Multiple species, Chinook, coho, steelhead, and chum, returned to the rivers each season, providing a reliable and abundant source of food that was the cornerstone of their diet and culture. The long, wet winters were a time to return to the warmth and security of the longhouses. This was a season for construction and repair, for the flourishing of the arts like weaving and carving, and for the vital work of community building through ceremonies, socializing, and the passing down of knowledge through a rich oral tradition of storytelling. This was not a simple hand-to-mouth existence, but a sophisticated system of resource management. The seasonal movements, the strategic location of villages in resource-rich areas like the Elliott Bay Tidelands, and an extensive trade and potlatch network all demonstrate a planned economy designed for resilience. This network helped distribute resources across the region, ensuring that communities could weather years of scarcity. It was a potent and effective system that was tragically shattered by the arrival of European diseases in the 1770s, which ravaged the population and began the unraveling of a world that had been in balance for thousands of years. Duwamish society was highly complex and structured. Like other Coast Salish peoples, it was stratified into upper classes, lower classes, and slaves, with status being largely hereditary. Nobility was determined by impeccable genealogy, extensive intertribal kinship ties, the wise use of resources, and the possession of esoteric spiritual knowledge. As a visible marker of status, high-born infants had their heads carefully shaped using cradle boards to produce a distinctive, sloping forehead. Their world was interconnected through extensive trade and marriage networks that stretched across the Pacific Northwest, linking villages and cementing political alliances. These relationships were not just social, they carried with them status and critical trading privileges, forming the basis of a complex regional economy and political landscape. Into this ancient and complex world, a new force arrived. The central figure navigating this pivotal moment was Cecile, c. 1786 to 1866, known to history as Chief Seattle. He was a man of immense stature, born of a Dwamish mother and a Suquamish father who was chief of his tribe. This dual heritage gave him leadership over both peoples, an alliance he skillfully maintained. In his youth, he was a formidable warrior, earning his reputation through leadership in intertribal conflicts. However, with the arrival of American settlers, whom the local people called Bostons, his focus shifted from warfare to diplomacy and accommodation, a strategic pivot in the face of an overwhelming new power. In November 1851, the arrival of the Denny party at Alki Point, a place the Duwamish called Spakwababsh, marked the beginning of permanent American settlement in the region. Chief Cecile and his people greeted the newcomers not with hostility, but with assistance. The Duwamish provided the fledgling settlement with crucial aid, including guides, labor for the first sawmill, food from their cultivated fields, and transportation by canoe. This support was instrumental, enabling the small group of settlers to survive their first difficult years. Cecile's welcome was not an act of surrender, but a calculated strategy of engagement. He actively sought out settlers to establish trade, and following traditional diplomatic practice in the Northwest, encouraged intermarriage between his people and the newcomers. This was a time-tested method for cementing alliances and trade privileges, and Cecile hoped it would allow him to forge a hybrid community where both peoples could coexist and prosper. He formed a particularly strong personal friendship with David Doc Mannard, one of the city's founders, who successfully advocated for naming the new town Seattle in the chief's honor. This accommodation policy should not be mistaken for passivity. Cecile was a seasoned political leader, employing sophisticated diplomatic strategies rooted in indigenous traditions to manage an unprecedented geopolitical shift and secure a future for his people in a rapidly changing world. Perhaps the most famous legacy of Chief Cecile is the speech he is said to have delivered in January 1854 upon the visit of the new Washington Territorial Governor, Isaac Stevens. However, the speech as it is widely known today is largely a work of fiction. No verbatim transcript of the original oration exists. It was likely delivered in Lushootseed, translated on the spot into Chinook jargon, a limited trade pidgin, and then rendered into English notes by a local settler, Dr. Henry Smith. Smith did not publish his version until 1887, over 3 decades later, and his account was written in the flowery, romanticized prose of the Victorian era. Over the next century, this text was altered repeatedly. The version that gained international fame in the 1970s as a profound environmentalist credo was, in fact, written by a Texas screenwriter for a film in 1971 and bears little resemblance to Smith's 1887 account. While the most famous words attributed to him are inauthentic, the core themes of the original speech, a powerful lament for the decline of his people, an expression of a deep and spiritual connection to the land, and the haunting promise that the spirits of his ancestors would always remain, reflect the profound historical moment of a leader witnessing the twilight of his people's world. The arrival of Governor Isaac Stevens in Washington Territory heralded a new and aggressive phase of American expansion. His mission from the federal government was clear and uncompromising: to consolidate the region's numerous tribes onto a few designated reservations, extinguish their aboriginal title to the land, and clear the way for white settlement. Stevens pursued this agenda with relentless speed, pushing through a series of treaties and a whirlwind tour of the territory that left little room for genuine negotiation or understanding. On January 22, 1855, Stevens convened a council with tribes from across the Puget Sound region at what is now Mukilteo. The proceedings were deeply flawed from the start. The complex legal terms of the treaty were translated from English into Chinook jargon, a trade language with a limited vocabulary that was wholly inadequate for conveying the nuances of a land cession treaty and was not even spoken by many of the indigenous leaders present. This created profound misunderstandings that persist to this day. Furthermore, Stevens was known to make expansive oral promises to the tribes, including assurances that reservations would be established in their traditional homelands that were conveniently omitted from the final written document that they were asked to sign. The Treaty of Point Elliott was a sweeping document of dispossession. In signing it, the Duwamish and other tribes ceded their rights, title, and interest to over 54,000 acres of their ancestral lands, a territory that today encompasses the cities of Seattle, Bellevue, Renton, Tukwila, and Mercer Island. In exchange for this immense concession, the United States government made a series of promises. These included a payment of $150,000 to be distributed among all the signatory tribes over many years, the provision of services such as schools and blacksmiths, and the establishment of several reservations. Critically, the treaty also included a clause that would become the foundation for future legal battles, guaranteeing the tribes the right of taking fish at usual and accustomed grounds and stations. Reflecting his stature and his strategy of cooperation, Chief Cecile's name was the first to be placed on the treaty. The treaty did establish several reservations, such as those at Tulalip and Port Madison. However, in what would become the central injustice of the Dwamish story, no reservation was ever created specifically for the Duwamish people within their own homeland. Many Duwamish refused to abandon their ancestral lands to move onto reservations designated for other tribes, some of whom were historical rivals. They remained in their villages, awaiting the reservation they believed had been promised to them. That promise was nearly fulfilled. In 1866, recognizing the deficiency in the treaty, a U.S. Indian agent named Thomas Page officially recommended that a reservation be established for the Duwamish along the Black River near modern-day Renton. This moment represented a clear admission by the U.S. government that its treaty obligation remained unmet. But the prospect of an Indian reservation so close to the burgeoning town of Seattle was unacceptable to the city's elite. In a stunning act of betrayal, 156 of Seattle's leading pioneers, including men who had personally benefited from Cecile's aid, such as Arthur Denny and Doc Maynard, signed a petition to Congress to block the reservation's creation.
They argued that such a reservation would do a great injustice to their quiet and flourishing settlements, and claimed, with paternalistic condescension, that it would be of little value to the Indians anyway. The petition was successful. The reservation was never established. This act was the critical moment that sealed the Duwamish's fate, deliberately making them a landless people in their own homeland. This landless status, created by the explicit political action of the settler community, would later become the primary justification used by the federal government to deny the tribe's very existence. The broken promise of the treaty was not a passive failure, but the beginning of a systematic and often violent campaign to erase the Duwamish people from their homeland. This process of unhoming combined legal, physical, and ecological force to sever the people's connection to the land. In 1865, just a decade after the treaty was signed, the Seattle Board of Trustees passed Ordinance No. 5. This law made it illegal for any Native American to live within the town limits, a town named for their own chief, unless they were employed by a white settler and housed directly on that settler's property. The ordinance codified the expulsion of the city's original inhabitants, transforming them into outcasts in their own land and legally enforcing racial segregation. The legal expulsion was accompanied by physical destruction. To prevent the Duwamish from returning to their traditional villages, settlers and even the U.S. Army systematically burned their longhouses to the ground. By 1894, the last of the great cedar structures that had defined the landscape for centuries were gone. A particularly egregious act occurred in March 1893 at the village of Tualaulaut, or Herring's House, a site that had been continuously inhabited since the 6th century. While the residents were away, a settler named James Watson led a group that set fire to the village's remaining 8 houses, destroying a 1,300-year-old community in a matter of hours. The displaced Dwamish, including elders, were forced to flee by canoe, their homes and history turned to ash. For many Duwamish who were driven from Seattle but refused to move to distant reservations, the only refuge was Ballast Island. This was not a natural island, but a man-made pile of rocks, bricks, and other debris dumped in Elliott Bay by sailing ships that needed to empty their ballast before loading up with Northwest timber. On this bleak, barren, and artificial landform, devoid of fresh water or natural resources, Duwamish families lived in makeshift tents and shelters. They survived by harvesting shellfish and selling woven baskets to the settlers who had exiled them. This exile to an island of refuse was a powerful symbol of their status as human surplus in the eyes of the growing city. In time, as Seattle's waterfront became ever more valuable, they were forced from even this desolate refuge. By 1917, the Duwamish camp on Ballast Island was gone. The final act of erasure was ecological. The engineering projects that built modern Seattle fundamentally remade the Duwamish homeland. The completion of the Lake Washington Ship Canal in 1916 lowered the lake's water level by 9 feet, which completely dried up the Black River, the very river where the reservation was to be located. This act of progress destroyed the last Duwamish duellage and a vital fishery in one stroke. The Duwamish River itself was dredged, straightened into an industrial waterway, and used for decades as a dumping ground for industrial waste. Its waters and sediments became so contaminated with PCBs, arsenic, and other toxins that it was eventually declared an Environmental Protection Agency Superfund cleanup site, its natural abundance replaced by a toxic legacy. The physical and ecological erasure of the Duwamish was followed by a long and arduous legal battle to erase them on paper. For nearly 50 years, this fight has been led by one woman. In 1975, Cecile Hansen, the great-great-grandniece of Chief Seale, is elected chair of the Duwamish tribe. Her entry into tribal politics was spurred by her younger brother, a fisherman, who was repeatedly cited for exercising what he believed was his ancestral right to fish in the Duwamish River. His frustration ignited in her a passion for justice that has defined her life and leadership ever since. The legal landscape for Northwest tribes was transformed in 1974 by United States versus Washington, a landmark case known as the Bolt decision. The ruling affirmed the treaty rights of federally recognized tribes to half of the harvestable fish. It was a monumental victory for tribal sovereignty. However, for the Duwamish, it was another devastating blow. In a subsequent ruling in 1979, Judge Bolt found that the Duwamish were ineligible for these treaty rights because, in the eyes of the court, they had not existed continuously as an organized tribe since 1855. The very dispossession and dispersion caused by the broken treaty were now being used as the legal justification for denying their treaty rights. This deniation made federal recognition an existential necessity. The tribe formally petitioned the Bureau of Indian Affairs for recognition in 1977. For nearly 2 decades, their case languished in bureaucracy. In 1996, the BIA issued a denial citing a supposed 10-year gap in the record from 1915 to 1925, where it claimed there was insufficient evidence of a continuous political structure. The tribe's researchers, led by anthropologist Ken Tollefson, worked tirelessly to fill this gap, unearthing Catholic Church records, news reports, and oral histories. Their work paid off. On January 19, 2001, in the final hours of the Clinton administration, the BIA reversed its decision and granted the Duwamish tribe federal recognition. The celebration lasted less than 48 hours. The incoming George W. Bush administration immediately suspended the order, and by September 2001, the BIA had formally reversed the decision, once again denying the Duwamish recognition and claiming they failed to meet the criteria for continuous political authority. This denial was upheld by the Obama administration in 2015, leaving the tribe in a state of legal limbo.
In May 2022, the Duwamish tribe filed a new lawsuit against the Department of the Interior, taking their fight back to federal court. The suit makes several powerful arguments: that Congress has, in fact, repeatedly recognized the tribe through various acts over the years; that the BIA's criteria are inherently discriminatory against a matrilineal tribe whose membership often descends from women who married non-natives, children the government historically refused to recognize as Indian; and that the BIA's decisions have been arbitrary and capricious. In a hopeful turn, a federal judge in early 2025 ordered the Department of the Interior to remand and reconsider the tribe's petition under updated 2015 rules, opening a new chapter in this century-long struggle.